What do you hockey players think about us NFL players?
I mean, I think that we're all a little bit envious of how athletic you guys are.
Oh,
Hockey's taught me a ton of lessons. I think that like my work ethic and my talent level was extremely high, but I had such a bad mindset. I actually was just like, I hadn't scored in so many games. Like, as you guys can see, this is kind of a trend. I butted heads with so many coaches.
what was one of those times when you butted heads and right away you're like, damn.
Dive into that.
I shouldn't have done that.
Oh, there were so many.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gridiron and Growth, the podcast that takes you in the mind of sports and business champions. And we are honored to have former NHL player of 9 years in his career and now current superstar agent for Wasserman in the field of hockey players. Please welcome Drew Shore.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Great to have you. Let's just open this up. What do you hockey players think about us NFL players?
I mean, I think that we're all a little bit envious of how athletic you guys are.
Okay,
Like,
thank
I
you.
think that a lot of hockey guys are pretty one sport dimensional. And
Yeah.
as we were discussing before this pod, what you guys are able to do on a Sunday is pretty remarkable. And we love to watch it. And it's cool to see what you guys can do.
You guys are envious of us. You skate, and I can't even see the puck when I'm watching a hockey game. I mean, the athleticism, what it takes to be a hockey player, why would you be envious of us? I don't know any football players that have ever played hockey.
Yeah, but I say this all the time. Like, hockey guys, some of them are good at golf, but other than that, they can't play too many sports. And we were joking about, I'm actually one of the better hockey basketball players, if you can believe that.
All
So you
right.
can tell the talent level isn't very high when it comes to crossing sports.
What do you guys do like in between? Do you play like pickup basketball when you're on these trips? Hey, pass the ball, eh? Like, is that how it goes? Or?
I mean, a lot of guys actually play as part of their warm-up routine. Most teams have like a good, like they call it two-touch soccer game, where like guys are in a circle. But when it comes to that, the European guys are hands down better than all the North American guys, because a lot of those European guys cross-train like with soccer and stuff in the summer, and so the European hockey players normally dominate the pre.
Wait, so professionals are better when they have multiple sports?
I mean,
Shocker.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like, we talk about it all the time, especially with like kids and stuff growing up now. I think that like if you can kind of focus on just being as athletic as you can, I think that that'll help you in the long run.
To all those parents out here who are watching, let your kid play multiple sports. It's
Hello.
going to help them be better in all the sports that they are playing. Regardless if it's not their main sport, let them play multiple sports.
Yes, we have to say it over and over again because it's crazy. I'm sure you get it too. People are like, what can I do for my 7-year-old to make sure they're in the NHL, right?
Oh yeah, it's crazy. And I mean, parents are even crazier now than they
Yeah.
were, I feel like, back in the day. And I think that like you said, I think that kids just should focus on becoming as athletic as they can and having fun.
Well, when you were a kid, you grew up with brothers. Your brothers played hockey too. Walk us through when you realized, like, I want this for me. I want to play hockey. I want to reach my greatness. What was that like?
I actually knew it at a really young age. Like, it was something that I grew up with pretty athletic parents, but my mom was from Florida, played professional tennis and was a swimmer, had never been on the ice in her life. My dad, as much as he wouldn't like me saying this, was less athletic, but I mean, he was like played lacrosse and soccer. So we had no hockey background, but I just fell in love with it from an early age at like probably 3 years old. And by the time I was like 5 or 7, like I was like determined to play in the NHL.
Really?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that like we touched on it a little bit. I was very fortunate to have 3 brothers. It was so much fun every day growing up, battling in every single thing from sports to running to video games to anything we could get our hands on. I'm the oldest brother, so some of my younger brothers were able to have a lot of success in different things, and it's really cool and something I pride myself on now, helping them out.
Talk a little bit about your journey. So you obviously make it to the NHL, but talk a little bit about the journey leading up to that. What was it like in terms of when did you know you were getting really good? And, you know, even in high school, did you, like, you know, was it the pros? Was that always on your mind?
It was always on my mind, but it was something that growing up here was like the hockey was basically horrible compared to what it is now. Like, you know what I mean? I mean, there's kids in Canada who are skating 8 hours a day. I don't know how to compare it to you guys, but I think it would be like playing like high school football in Colorado versus like Texas or Florida or California
different.
or something. It's just
Minnesota.
like a whole, it's just like a whole different level. So I actually left home when I was 13 years old, went and lived with another family in Canada and then Michigan before coming back and going to DU. But it was something that like I was just obsessed with from the time I was like 7 or 8 years old, and kind of saw that, you know what I mean? People, it was very hard to kind of make the NHL from here, and just wanted to put myself in kind of the best possible situation to give myself a chance.
If your parents definitely saw something in you to let you move to live with another family because you love hockey so much.
Well, I begged them, and people always think like, and they were really hesitant to let me go. And now that I have my own kids, it's crazy to think I was like on my own at 13. Like I was living in Vancouver. Sometimes I took public taxis to like practice, back from practice and stuff if the family wasn't available. And it was one of those things that like it forces you to grow up pretty quickly, but learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes along the way, and just trying to kind of learn from them as I go.
What were some of the biggest adjustments when you left at 13? Again, I'm with you. As a parent, that sounds crazy. And as Bennie said, like your parents clearly were listening to you and you had this passion. But what were some of the biggest things you learned at 13 when you got off the plane in Vancouver?
Well, I think for me, I think a lot of athletes can relate to this, but when hockey was going well, I was on top of the world, even as a 13-year-old kid, because like if I was scoring goals, I was happy. I was hanging out with my teammates. I was kind of like on my own at 13, which was cool because no one was telling me when to go to bed, what to do. But when I started to struggle at different points, whether I was in a scoring slump or something like that, as a young kid, it can be hard to kind of control that emotional balance, and you really start to miss home more. You start to miss your friends. You start to kind of question, like, oh, it'd be nice to just be like a regular high school kid, like at a party on a Friday night. So I think that depending on kind of how hockey went, I was able to kind of manifest and make things easier depending on where I was.
What are the biggest lessons that hockey has taught you?
Hockey's taught me a ton of lessons. I think like my first year of retirement, I was an absolute mess. And I think that...
As we all are.
Yeah. Like people talk about it all the time. And I thought for me, the hardest thing is like, I felt like I failed at the one thing I set out my whole life to do. And that's a weird thing to say. And like when you tell people that, because like when I was the 12-year-old kid in Vancouver, I would have like cut off my fingers if you told me like I could play one game in the NHL or like score one goal. But then like as you kind of keep raising the bar, like I always envisioned winning multiple Stanley Cups, like signing $100 million contract. And then all of a sudden you're like 30 years old and like dropping your kids off at school and like you think you'd be the happiest in the world, but I felt like I failed. And it wasn't until I really spent some time working on it and like talked with someone and changed the mindset from being like, I failed at the one thing I always wanted to do, to be like, now I'm going to be so successful in phase 2 of my life. And I wouldn't have had that had it not been for those trials and tribulations in phase 1.
I want to stay in phase 1 for a minute, because when we first connected, you told me something that rarely athletes admit, yet we all know athletes do. You said, I could have been better had I worked harder and studied a little harder. And at some point in your career, you started to get there. What was that feeling like? I mean, you're playing hockey, you know, you're a hero around the world to many fans, right? And there's still more work you could have done. What was that realization? And that's awesome honesty, but like what made you realize that and then change it?
I think for me, it was more working on my mindset. Like, I think that like my work ethic and my talent level was extremely high, but I had such a bad mindset. Like I butted heads with so many coaches. And I think that one of the lessons or takeaways I try and help kids with now is make your coach like you.
Yeah.
Like even if your coach is the dumbest coach in the world, make them think that you believe in them. Make them think you think it's smart. Like I can only imagine in football, like
a lot of stupid coaches.
A lot of stupid coaches, but like telling your coach that they're stupid every day, like I'm sure the first time you get beat on the field, they're going to take you off. Whereas like if the coach likes you, you get beat on the field once, he might give you a second chance, maybe even a third chance. So it's like, I just had such a combative personality with so many different coaches because I always thought I was smarter than them, and there were a lot of dumb coaches. But like I try and tell kids, like make your coach be your biggest fan, and I think that that's just such a valuable lesson, even in like business now. I mean, I was talking about it to someone the other day. It's like make your boss love you. You know what I mean? Even if you don't love your boss, having your boss love you is going to do you so many benefits, and I think that that's something that I really took away from my career and wish I could have handled better.
What was one of those times when you butted heads and right away you're like, damn. Damn.
Dive into that.
I shouldn't have done that now.
Oh, there were so many. I got traded from Florida to Calgary, and And there's a guy now who's kind of has a famous reputation of just not getting along with players well named Bob Hartley. And I think that something else I realized in my career is sometimes like a lot of people are afraid to tell athletes the truth.
Yes.
Like I think that for me, I wasn't good enough that I could have been a first line like player in the NHL, but I could have been a good second or third line center. But I was so determined to be a first line player that like if I started on the second or third line, rather than just trying to have the best game I can, I would just be losing it, pissed on the world that I wasn't playing on the first line. So I think that that's something that I think I also learned is just like do the best job you can on that day, and then things will take care of themselves. But if you're always worried about like what's going to happen in the future or what you could have done differently, like do your job that day and things normally work out.
Yeah, well, let's dive into what you button heads with this guy. What was that like?
It was on a daily basis. Like I went from somewhere in Florida where, so like Florida wasn't that good, and I was playing on the first line, and then I get traded to a really good team, and I'm instead of playing in hockey, it's like I was playing from 18, 20 minutes a game to like 10 or 12 minutes a game. So then you just kind of as an athlete get in this vicious cycle of like, okay, well your minutes are down. Well then if your attitude gets worse, then you're even playing worse in those 10 to 12 minutes, and then the snowball effect just ends up being so negative. Whereas, like, I think that my brother actually, who's a year younger than me, was able to have a much better NHL career than I did. He, like, embraced the 10 to 12 minutes. And that's why he was able to play for a lot longer than I did, just because he was like, okay, I'm a third, fourth line center, and I'm going to be the best third or fourth line center that I can be. And he was able to kind of run with that, and it's something that I wasn't able to do.
I like the fact that you bring that up in terms of coaches, because when I first got to Denver, Tyke Tolbert was our receivers coach, and he made it very clear, and I love Tyke for it, like, hey, Demarius, Emmanuel, and Wes are our starters. Like everybody else, you're going to have to fit in, and you're not going to get the ball like you got in college, and that's what it's going to be. You're going to have to learn how to play special teams, and I really appreciated him for that. Like, hey, you're going to get 10 to 15 plays on offense. Make the most of those. These are the guys that are getting paid. And then as I progressed throughout my career, a lot of coaches didn't keep it honest with me. And then it was a breath of fresh air for me in 2020 when I got a chance to play for Sean Payton. And he did the same thing. Right when I signed there, he was like, look, Michael Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, they're getting the ball. This is where you fit into this offense. And, you know, if you do your thing, then you'll get more plays. And I was like, athletes love that. Just make it clear. I think coaches just don't want to do that. It's ridiculous to me.
Yeah, I think having clear expectations, and I even see that on the agency now, like that's a good point, because it's like now like some agents like will tell you like, oh, like they're signing you because you might have a chance to get the ball there. But I think that the best thing I can do now is tell athletes like the truth. It's like, okay, they're signing you there to play on special teams, and if one of these guys gets hurt, we know you can step in or do whatever. But I think that setting clear expectations is something that I think helps everyone.
I want to stay a couple questions in hockey. In the career, phase one, as you call it. How the hell do you guys know when you're getting on the ice? Because it looks like the hockey coaches are the calmest coaches. They're just like, yep, and then three guys jump off the bench, and they're like, yep, and three. Like, what are those conversations like on the bench there?
So there's a lot that goes into that. The team who has home ice advantage, they always get to go last. So that's a big deal, like especially in the playoffs and stuff, because there's certain spots whereas like the other coach basically has to send their players out first.
Oh, it's an unwritten rule of hockey.
No, it's a written rule.
Okay,
like home team gets last change. So like if a face-off happens in the offensive zone, like the home team gets the advantage of seeing who the other team's putting out first. So then there's like a little bit of chess that goes into it. Like, do you want to play like your best players versus their best players? Do you want to try and put like really defensive guys against their best players so then you can kind of free up your offensive guys? So there's a lot of that.
What's it sound like on the bench, though, when Drew Shore's getting called into the ice?
Normally they call lines by, like, the center iceman. Like, so, like, every line has left wing on offense, left wing, center, right wing. So, like, the center iceman. And so, basically, like, they'll kind of, when one line's up, the coach will be like, Shorzy, your line's up next. So you kind of know. And then when your center iceman comes, you jump.
He goes, yep. He goes,
yeah. And then it's really funny when you do jump, and then they send their best players out, and you get called right back. That's like a that's like a standard thing that happened to me a lot. Or like other guys, oh yeah.
So you're like, get back.
Oh, you're all ready to go, and it's like change, and then you're just back on the bench and hanging out for a while. Oh yeah.
And then
have you ever tripped?
Oh yeah, a bunch of times. I actually, this is a wild story, but in Europe the ice rink is bigger. I played in Russia and Switzerland for a while, but then I ended up signing back with Vancouver for 1 year. So I came back, so the rink's a lot smaller. So my first time back in Vancouver after I was playing in Europe, I was sitting there for warm-ups. We're back in the NHL, music's bumping, life's good again. And I opened up like almost like pivoted as the winger and ran into the boards and fell during my first warm-ups
You
back.
fall on ice.
Oh yeah, back in warm-ups. And I just remember being like, oh man, I should have known it was going to be a tough start right after that happened. But no, it's just something to laugh about.
And then what explains the difference in intensity with playoff hockey? Because in the NFL, like, we get better as the season goes on, and you get smarter players. And in the playoffs, you're going against a team that is good at what they do and understands the situations. But hockey, it's like you guys are playing two-hand touch, and then you run around with chainsaws trying to kill each other during the playoffs. What's the difference in playoff hockey?
Yeah, I'm biased, but like I love playoff hockey.
It's the best sport.
And I think like the competitive nature that comes up, like in football, I'm sure like a cornerback and a receiver get into it a little bit during the game. But if they had to
100%.
go against each other every play for 7 like days in a row, it's like it almost creates like an all-out war. And literally like teams go through and it's just like you almost go through their roster, like you almost have like an hour and a half, 2-hour meeting before the series, go through all their players. And it's like literally you go from everything to like you almost have a guy on the other team that you're just like, okay, like I'm going to outplay this guy, whatever it takes. And I mean, you see guys go through the wall, like the injury reports you see like after series, like this guy played with a broken, like I know that Chris Tanev, I think, who just lost on Dallas, like literally like played through a broken foot like the last couple games of the series. And they were just like freezing it up in his boot. So I think that, I mean, I love watching playoff hockey, but I mean, you guys play pretty hard, a lot harder one day a week. So I mean, I think that in hockey, there's so many games that like the guys who are really good are almost going through the motions a little bit during, because I mean, you can't play that hard for that many games in a hockey season. So
8
it's
months,
like,
yeah.
But then you kind of know to playoffs, guys are all ramping up.
The closest thing to a 7-game series for us would be training camp, and fights break out literally after
Daily.
day 5. After day 5, because you see you're going against the same person every single day, 3 hours in the heat, and yeah, and don't let us practice against another team.
Oh, man.
Oh, that would be.
We practice
your
against
sport is so violent.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hockey player saying that to us. Yeah.
What is the dynamic like? I would be interested to know, like, I'm sure there's some type of like in training camp in football, you obviously have your star players. They're kind of just going through the motions, I assume, during training camp.
No chance.
Can't. If you go through the motions, you get hurt.
Your star players ramp up like the first week and a half, and then as the preseason gets going, they ramp down a little bit, and then when the end of training camp comes, then it's all on them.
Yeah. They'll change the reps, or if it's like an older player in the NFL, like Andre Johnson, I had the honor of playing with him, and he would, first week he's taking, maybe 3 reps a practice per period, and then it's 5, and then like Bennie says, he's going to shut him down to get him ready for what has to be a 27-week season at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's
so
crazy.
star players are getting hit hard by their own teammates.
Well, now look.
No, we
if
don't
you-
get hit.
Yeah. No.
If you can't
those guys don't get hit.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Those guys, those low skill players don't get hit. High skill players we hit every day.
Anybody that's at the top of the totem pole in terms of skilled players that's getting paid a lot of money will not get touched in that practice.
Yeah, if you hit them, then I'm coming after you.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of unwritten rules. Now I think
It's,
about it at
it's
training
the same
camp.
in hockey.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you got guys who like, if there's a guy in a vulnerable spot, like guys know kind of to lay off on the hit or whatever.
Yeah.
Who was the first star that you went against in hockey that you were like, oh, I'm in the NHL?
So for me, it was Sidney Crosby, just because I grew up as like, I mean, you can make the argument he's a top 3 player maybe ever. He had already won his cups. He just was like scored the big goal to beat the U.S. in the Olympics. So I just remember like taking a couple face-offs against him early in my career where like I felt pretty good about myself.
Did he talk to you?
No, not really. He doesn't talk. I mean, he kind of lets us talk. I don't think he's going to waste too much time talking to me. But no, I just remember like facing off against him was pretty cool.
I think you've talked about your moment. I had one that just popped up in my mind that I thought about. Is Charles Woodson, playing against Charles Woodson. It was just like, you won the Heisman in '97, and I'm playing against you in 2015. This is insane.
That's nuts. That's nuts, man. Mine was actually just seeing the helmets like in the preseason game. I was like, oh, like this isn't a college team anymore. Like this is the real deal. Who was the best trash talker on the ice when you played in the NHL?
That's a tough question. We had a guy on our team who actually was one of my own teammates who like Ed Jovanovski, who's like a veteran guy, but was making a lot of money like for 20 years. Like, I mean, he was making, at the time, I think he was making like $8 or $9 million, but he was doing that in like 1995 when guys weren't really making money. So he had some hilarious one-liners just about different things. Like I just remember I used to be my first year, I'm 21 there, and I used to love to play like poker and stuff on the plane, and they didn't have like a blanket for the cards. So he looks at me, and I was just happy to be in the card game at the time because it's all these older guys or whatever. And he looks at me and he's like, Shorzy, why don't you just go grab one of your dress shirts? And like, I didn't know what to do because he wanted, like, he was joking, wanted one of my dress shirts to be like where they all throw the shit. But like, I didn't want to get up because then like I looked like a huge. But I also couldn't like really say anything back to him, so I ended up kind of just like waiting it out, and then he ended up like laughing, and he was an unbelievable guy. But I just remember being put in such a weird spot because I was like, I can't get up now, but I can't really disrespect him either. Right. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, there was a lot of good trash talkers.
Biggest enforcer that on another team that was just like, all right, I got to watch out for this guy.
So when I started coming into the league, teams like the game was still much tougher. Like every team had like 2 or 3 like legitimately like heavyweight tough guys where they've kind of gotten away from that a lot. Like now there's probably 5 or 7 in the league. But like when I was first started, like there were some guys who were like scary tough still. And I actually, my last fight, I actually got beat up so bad that like, this is like 10 years ago now, like there's some like hockey fight site that like replays it as fight of the month, like every March or April. So it's funny now, it's 11 years later and I'll get all these texts on this day when they'll release like the biggest beat up of March. And it's just me just getting my face pounded in.
What did you do to piss this guy off?
I actually was just like, I hadn't scored in so many games. Like, as you guys can see, this is kind of a trend. Wanted to be a goal scorer, didn't score enough, not a good recipe. And I actually just asked him to fight. And literally, I wasn't having a bad game. And the punch count was probably actually like 35-1.
Oh.
Wait, you said you asked him to fight?
Yeah.
What does that sound like?
Well, nothing. Like, so it's like we were both skating back, like off a change, and kind of ran into each other. And he kind of pushed me, and then I cross-checked him back. And then I actually asked him to fight. And at first, like, he almost like did a double take because he didn't think I was serious. I think going into that fight, he had like 15 on the year. I didn't have one fight, and I told him I was serious. And then he punched me 35 times in the face. I don't think I got close once, and that was the end of it.
I think that in all of sports, I think losing a hockey fight has to be the most embarrassing because it's like everybody's watching. This is a fist fight. What are the teammates of the player who lose a fight? What do they say when you get back to the bench?
I think it depends on the situation. Like, I think that, like, sometimes, like, if a guy gets, like, cheap shotted and, like, you step in and fight, like, no matter what happens in the fight, like, guys don't care. Like, guys are, like, if you're, like, sticking up for a teammate, even if you get – now, I wasn't really sticking up for a teammate. I was just playing bad in a bad mood. So that was, like, a little bit of a different scenario. But I think that's, like, one of the cool things that, like, if a guy does get cheap shotted and, like, a guy steps in, especially someone who's, like, normally tougher than them, that you kind of gain a lot of respect from your teammates doing that.
That's crazy. Hey, want to fight? You just never see that.
No, yeah.
All right, now let's pivot into phase 2, agency. You were at Wasserman. You just left Wasserman. Talk a little bit about the transition in terms of what made you want to go into the agency world.
Going back to my career of phase 1, I was never able to sign a long-term contract. So
we're in that camp too.
So I was always on like
1-2-year
deals. So it was like every year it was basically like I was always kind of analyzing which players were heading to the market, how teams were doing different things. So I almost, even early in my career, kind of got like a taste of the free agency market and stuff like that. And I just knew that there were so many things I wish I did differently during my career that I was like, okay, I want to help the next player, maybe not make as many mistakes as I did or make some better decisions along the way. So that was a lot of my motivation for getting into the agency business.
What are 3 of the things that you help new players with in terms of understanding they're a professional now?
I'd say 3 things. One is the grass isn't always greener. I think that that's something that like a lot of guys in all sports, I can't speak for football, but like you think like, okay, well, if I was on this team, maybe I'd be getting 25 catches a game versus, I mean, not a game, but that's maybe 10 catches a game versus 1 catch a game. So I think a lot of guys now, especially these kids, as soon as they see adversity, like the common theme is like, all right, get me out of here. Like trade me. And it's like, okay, well, first of all, teams aren't lining up to trade for average players. That's something that, like, because I said that a lot during my career. It's like, unless, like, okay, it's like if teams wanted you, they'd all be begging down the door and you'd be out of there anyway. So I think that not always thinking the grass is greener. I think that people who are able to just have a little more like sense of even keel. Like I said, I was always on top of the world or I was retiring the next day, and you emotionally just drain yourself out so much that day. But guys who are able to play, at least in hockey, for 20 years, Like, they have a great game, they have a bad game, they're kind of the same. It's kind of roll with the punches, like back to work the next day. So I think that like not wasting energy on like burning unnecessary energy is something that the athletes do. And then I'd go back to that coaching thing. Like my brother, who had a longer career, like played in LA when they had so many superstars, like his role was a lot of it like just being a good locker room guy. Like he was good on the ice, but like all the best players in NHL love hanging out with him off the ice. And I definitely think that that helped him a lot, just because guys go into their exit meetings or year-end meetings with coaches, GMs, and like, hey, this is a guy we got to have around. So I think that unless you're like a star player where you're so talented, like being a good teammate is super helpful for people too, just because there's so many guys, I'm sure it's the same, but like who are replaceable or skill sets are like almost comparable, that it's like, okay, if this dude's a good dude and a good teammate, like we want him around.
100%.
So I think that, like, not to say that I was a bad teammate, but I think that like my brother was kind of the ultimate glue guy, and I think that that helped him a lot.
What was the biggest adjustment you had to make leaving an athlete world and going to a world where people don't ask to fight, where people don't, like where it's just a totally different? What was your biggest adjustment getting to phase 2?
There's so many answers I have to that question. I think that one thing that people don't like to admit, and I didn't admit this for a while, but someone brought it up to me recently, is when you're playing hockey and you meet anyone, whether it's at the school pickup line or in a business thing, you tell someone you play hockey, people are like immediately interested in you. You know what I mean? And it sparks conversation and you feel like you have a purpose. And then it's like, then when you tell people like, oh, I retired and oh, what are you doing now? I don't really know. I'm kind of going through it. People are like, okay, like kind of roll their eyes. Don't get like, all right, on to my day. So I think that like that, and then also too, you just miss so much of the, like you're not able to replicate like the like for me, scoring a goal was literally like the best euphoric high in the world that I got. Like I'm sure catching a touchdown or
Dragging your nuts across somebody's face mask.
Yeah, absolutely running someone over.
Yeah, you've seen it. No, yeah, you've seen it. You've seen it.
You know what I mean? And so when you retire, I don't know about you guys, but like there's no way for you to like replicate that touchdown or you dragging your nuts across someone's face.
Not legally, no.
Yeah. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I think you're 100% right.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I still feel like I am transitioning, but I think one of the hardest parts is that you don't have that release of like scoring a touchdown in front of 80,000 people or being in a locker room or just in a weight room with 65 guys who are all trying to get better for the same thing. And after we all squat or bench press and it's, everybody's in there, or we're doing a complex workout with Luke or something like that on a Friday, like we're all doing it together and you just don't find those moments. And I think that's one of the things that I still struggle with to this day is that where is the group of people that are all trying to get better just for the same thing? And it's hard to do it in a corporate setting where like after you close a meeting, it's like, yeah, we're super excited, but like nobody's
chest bumps.
There's no screaming. There's no like, all right, we're going out tonight.
Yeah. For me, it's the nature of what I know about our nature, and what I mean by that is so many people avoid conflict outside of sport. Whereas we know if you have conflict with a teammate, you're going to trust that teammate more, right? Like that's a part of growth. And so many times, for me especially, people would say things. I'm like, wow, man, like I would punch you in the face if you said that to me and be okay, right? And I can't do that now, right? There's HR departments and things. So like people being completely comfortable and then having an opinion was very tough for me, right? And then also being able to, we all been in locker rooms. We've been in locker rooms during, great events and tragic events. And to be able to just be in a locker room and say something, and then 5 other guys who are thinking about it from whatever side of the locker room are giving you 4 other opinions and 4 other perspectives. Mm-hmm. And we don't have that space right now. You can't talk about something that you may be in an evolution on, whether it's a topic that's social related or finance related, and you can't get those perspectives without getting shut down. So that was a real adjustment too. So, well, how am I going to get information and perspective if I can't even talk about it? Especially if these people are avoiding conflict, right? So that was the biggest adjustment for me, learning the language to say, hey, that doesn't work for me. You're going to have to try that again. Things like that.
Per our last conversation.
Yeah, right? Like,
per my last email.
One of the things I tell former athletes when they ask me, I said, you have to learn how to communicate, because we could communicate fast, strong. Like we've all been in a place where you can yell, hey, way to go, Drew. It's like not threatening to you,
or
right?
Like, hey, that's bro.
Yeah. Or if you were in the office, you're like, hey, where'd it go? People are flying, coffee spilled, But that was a big adjustment, And then you became a father as well. So how have you, as an ultimate competitor, become a father of 2 daughters?
Well, that was very hard for me. I think that balancing being a dad and athlete at the same time is very hard. And I think that anyone who says that it's easy is either lying to you, or someone please call me and tell me how they did it. So I thought it was really hard, especially on my first daughter, because like as an athlete, as you guys know, you're used to having a very selfish day to day.
Completely selfish. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I go to the rink and practice. If I feel a little bit tired, like I'm taking a nap, or I'm going to get needles in my hips, or I'm doing whatever, going to treatment, and then whatever, and then I'm going to bed. And then all of a sudden, like you have a child, and I had a child pretty young for an athlete, I would say. I think I was like 25 or 26. Whoa. And so it was one of those things that you always kind of felt like in the back of my head that I was sacrificing something. Like if I was at home with my wife and daughter, I felt like, oh, I should probably like be taking a nap or like doing something so I'm not tired the next day. But then if I was doing all that stuff, I felt like I was kind of sacrificing a little bit at home. Like, hey, like you've done enough at the rink. It's time to like get home, be a dad, be a good father. So I think that balancing that was tough. And I think that I probably could have done a little bit of a better job, but it's hard. I don't know. Did you have, what was your?
I'm a dog dad. So.
He's a dog dad. We'll leave him alone for 2 weeks at a time. We get it. No, I mean, you're right. I remember the first practice I had after having my son, and my coach was yelling at me about something I did wrong. And I was just thinking there like, man, I really don't care. Like it just took me to a whole nother level of like, yeah, I'm going to get this right. Cause I'm providing now, but it was an adjustment. In keeping with phase 2, how was the adjustment for you and your wife to go, hey, I'm gone sometimes a week at a time, 2 weeks at a time, and now I'm home all the time?
I think the hardest thing for her was not that I was home all the time, but I just wasn't myself, right? Especially those first 2 years. Like I wasn't the best version of myself because I was kind of bitter. You know what I mean? As we discussed, I was a little bit angry being done, didn't really know what I wanted to do next, didn't have a ton of like, you know what I mean, passion or jump. And normally it's like game day, I'm popping out of bed, smiling, hopefully scoring, not scoring, whatever. You know what I mean? I just had so much like on it every day. It was bringing a lot of energy, and I didn't have that like the first year or 2 years I retired. And I think that was probably the hardest thing for her, is because I was probably a shell of the kind of person she knew for the previous 10 years.
Did you guys talk through that? Did she understand? I think my wife has done a good job of really understanding, and we've had a great therapist really help us and navigate these conversations. But like, did your wife know like, hey, like, you're pissed about this?
Yeah, I think that I actually went and saw someone, and Ryan and I have talked a little bit about this because like during my career when I was butting heads with everyone, I was always asked to like talk to the team psychologist or whatever, but never really gave it any. I was just like, oh, that. I should be playing more. Then I'd be I'd be happier if I'm like scoring more. But so I never really like put much either effort or time. And I actually saw someone who helped like a lot of Olympic athletes retire, and that kind of goes back into my thing about like, okay, like my phase 2 is going to be successful because of my failures in phase 1, but it was more just on me to kind of, I mean, I don't know, like things happen and you only get one life, and I kind of wasted a year or two sulking and being about like, you know what I mean, kind of living that life, but like didn't want to do that for the next 5 to 10 or whatever years. So kind of just like tried to pivot as quickly as I could, and then things kind of got back to normal at home.
Last question for me. Fear is a part of every day as an athlete. And what I realized recently is that as athletes, there's a consequence to not overcoming your fear, right? Like if I'm skating towards you, you're skating towards me, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to give in to my fear, I'm going to have a physical consequence. A lot of people don't have that in life. What can you tell our listeners about fear and their ability in fear?
I think that fear can be used in multiple ways. Like I was always pushed as a kid and pushed myself as a kid because I was fearful of not reaching my goals. So I think that forced me to work harder. And I think that like as a 15-year-old kid, like I was fearful that like I moved away from home, like I got to make it. Like, you know what I mean? Like I just like, I spent the last 2 years in a rink rather than going to homecoming and prom and stuff. Like, so like, that's why I'm up every day, like shooting pucks, working out, doing all that stuff. So I think that fear can be good, but then as you guys know, it's also like, I was fearful transitioning because your whole life you have an identity and a purpose. And then it's like, all right, well, I'm a hockey player. Well, now what am I? So trying to like recreate that is something that I think that it can be used as motivational as well.
Drew, man, really appreciate you coming on the show, man. I'll see you at Greenwood Village Athletic Club.
Man, y'all rich people, man. I got a
good.
Peloton. No, hey, honor to have you. It's amazing to see your transition, and as fellow former athletes, we're just so happy for you that you're smiling. You're a dad. You're in your daughter's life. I mean, it's amazing to see, and congratulations.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. You guys have a great podcast here, and happy to be a part of it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Gridiron and Growth. Make sure to shoot us an email at gridirongrowthpod@gmail.com for some questions, and sign up for the newsletter that can be found in the show notes. Big special thanks to Big Up Studios and Streamline Media for helping support Gridiron and Growth.